What's up, everybody? Happy holidays. The holidays are coming soon, which means the end of this year and the start of next year. And of course, the start of next year means ProQuest seasons are on the horizon. So let's talk about six heroes that I think you're going to see very prevalently at the top tables in ProQuest seasons. So this video is perfect for you if you are a new player or new to the game, or if this is your first ProQuest season and you're just ingratiating yourself within this competitive meta. You found the correct video. So let's break down these six heroes, one of which you may not agree with, but I'll explain my reasoning as to why I think it's going to be towards the top tables when we get there. First of all, though, you probably expect this one on the list. Icelander, the world champion Michael Hamilton showed everybody how it's done when playing Icelander, both at the World Championships and at the US Nationals. His version of Bull-lander, where you play Wounded Bull and Fandal's Fighting Spirit and other big things like E-Strike and just slam them down, and then also kind of on the side throw scary attacks, or I guess I should say spells, from the arsenal on your opponent's turn to just kill them. It works, it's going to keep working, and there's not a ton that you can really do to slow it down. Well, that's not true. I shouldn't say there's not a ton that you can do. There are things that you can do to slow the deck down, and of course, you have to be a good pilot to be able to actually know when to attack and when to hold back. And there are a few unfortunate matchups. I will still say this, and I will probably die on this hill, but I do think that the Dromai matchup, including both the control and the aggro, is really good for Dromai and not so good for Icelander. No matter which version of the Icelander deck you play, it never feels super great, and you kind of have to take a specific line just to try and get the win in that matchup. That being said, if that's your worst matchup and Dromai may not be in the top tables, you may be good to just kind of run this on out there because Icelander is just that powerful. Also very powerful is Phi Rising Rebellion. Phi is an interesting one because I feel as though Phi in some ways is, I don't want to say hard countered, but is certainly countered by Icelander in a lot of respects. Now, yes, there are players, and they have shown over the past, I don't know, 5 months or so, that you can just add more blues to Phi and just keep doing Phi things, and you can still find success against Icelander. And it's still one of those decks that can push ridiculous amounts of damage in a very perhaps linear fashion, but it can still push a ton of damage. And so if you're looking for an aggro deck that you feel can be very consistent and that you can get very good at executing and then just win lots of games, well, Phi might be for you. Now, how you play into Icelander does kind of, I think, should delineate whether or not you play this deck. It should determine whether or not you choose to take this deck to a ProQuest, because you're gonna see Icelander. And if you can play into that matchup, and if you've teched for that matchup, and if you understand how that's gonna play out and when to overextend and when to hold resources, then I think you'd be just fine picking up the old Phi Rising Rebellion and throwing just lots of attacks, just a whole bunch of attacks at your opponent's face. Speaking of throwing a bunch of attacks, Briar kind of does the same thing. And here's the thing. We've talked about the, 3 decks now so far, 3 heroes so far, and 2 of these are aggro heroes, and Briar being one of them, and Phi being the other. And both of these aggro decks are honestly the 2 probably best aggro decks in the game, with one maybe notable exception that we'll talk about here in a little bit, surprisingly. But Briar is consistent in some ways and inconsistent in others, but essentially the spike of finding Channel Mount Heroic and just slamming it down, crushing people with the buff that is Channel Mount Heroic, is just too good to pass up. Now, a couple of seasons ago, I thought Viserai was just strictly better because it was more consistent and didn't rely on like this idea where I need to find Channel Mount Heroic to really have a spike turn. And that's kind of what Briar was, or Briar, I don't want to say is doing still, because there are some tweaks to the deck. That's kind of my take, was like, okay, so it's less consistent than Viserai, and Viserai can push a ton of damage, so maybe Viserai's better, but it just turns out that if you find a Channel Mount Heroic in the deck, of which there are 3, and you dig for it and you play it, it's just better. It's just better. And we found this out, and we found this to be the case because the second place, the runner-up deck at World Championships for Flesh and Blood, was none other than Briar. And it was honestly, it was a very close game in the middle game of the championship where it could have really kind of gone either way, because Briar just pushes a lot of damage and kind of got Icelander on their toes a little bit. And that is perhaps one of the ways that you kind of combat Icelander, is you just say, okay, you can disrupt me to some degree, but then I'm going to slam down Channel Mount Heroic, and I'm going to pay past your distractions and your disruptions, because I run a decent number of blues and yellows, and then I'm just going to slam you for like 21 damage on a turn. And draw cards and threaten a lot of things. And this deck, honestly, I think its stock is rising a little bit, because I do think the Royal Dromai, including like the Crown of Providence, Crown of Dominion, is on the rise, and honestly is very, very scary, because at any point Briar can get half of an Embodiment of Lightning by playing a cash-in to draw 2 cards for free. Yikes. It's almost as if someone made a video talking about how good Crown of Dominion is. Hey, speaking of not aggro decks, that's a terrible transition. Oldhim, Grandfather of Eternity, is still lurking about, and honestly will still probably be very consistent if you know how to play the deck. And it's a natural foil to your overall like aggro matchups, I guess, aggro decks in the meta. It is this natural like stopgap. It in some ways kind of feels like how Prism acted for certain decks. It's like, okay, you can play your aggro decks, but eventually you're going to face an Oldhim, and if you don't know how to get over the top of defenses, well, then you're probably going to lose, because Oldhim is just incredibly consistent at defending and can then disrupt and kind of pivot on a specific turn and throw down something that disrupts you and deals damage, and maybe like throws a pummel on top. And so Oldhim is one that you'll have to understand the matchups for, or understand the sideboarding for, or have a specific game plan going into. And it's one of the reasons why he sticks around season after season being at the top, because he has powerful defense and powerful disruption capabilities. It's like the premier control deck. And there's like, again, one notable exception, which we're going to talk about exactly next, which honestly actually counters him in a lot of ways, which is hilarious. But like I still view him as the premier control deck, and if people are going to sit down and play control, it's going to be Oldhim. By the way, I would not describe Icelander in just about any form, probably just about any form, as a control deck. Like, for example, if you're playing control Icelander with like a Frost Hex game plan, I consider that more of a combo deck, because you're looking to set up these Frost Hexes and then, combo off and like steal all your opponent's cards, swing the tempo greatly. But this right here, this dude, he's more of a control deck than anything we've talked about thus far, which brings us to one of the two that you may not have. If you're an experienced player, you're like, yes, all 4 of these that we've talked about, these are the top right now. They were the top previously. Now let's talk about 2 that are, maybe have the stock rising a little bit. And the first one is Dash. Now, this hero has gotten a couple of good tools in Dynasty that has allowed Dash to get even better. And we saw Dash's stock, as I mentioned, rising prior to this current season, prior to the World Championships, with like U.S. Nationals wins or U.S. National top 8s, I should say, and other national top 8s and World Champion finishes, things like that, that we've seen. And really the deck that was doing it wasn't like a full aggro deck. It was more the super hard control, tons of defense reactions, tons of life gain, Turtle Dash that really kind of rose to prominence. And it was very good into a variety of decks, and including Oldhim, like I just talked about, because you basically just turtled up, defended, set up all of your items that allowed you to basically just fire your pistol ad nauseum to the end of the game. And so you worked your way, as a control player, you worked your way all the way down to this natural fatigue state where both players have just a few cards left in deck and cycle. And you just use all of your cards to pitch blues and, kind of push like 15 damage a turn at the end of the game. And that deck still exists. You can still play that deck. But interestingly enough, the Dash players of the world got enough aggressive tools in Dynasty that you can actually also just straight up play aggro dash again, including with like Hanabi Blaster, or if you just want to go full on Wombat Dash. Everybody loves it. Full on Talishar Wombat Dash, and just come on in with the Talishar at the end of the turn and play all this aggressive stuff. I mean, like Pulse Wave Harpoon coming in and like doing some serious work and forcing the cards out of hands. There's like a lot of these little cards and these little changes and these little tweaks that just add enough to the deck that allows you to really commit to just coming in hot if you want to play aggro. So weirdly enough, Dash is in this interesting place where you could play aggressively, you could play defensively, you could try to build a deck that's like straight mid-range that allows you to pivot. And in fact, that has been in, I guess, years past, I should say now. It's crazy to think that's a couple years ago. That was like the terror of the meta, was like a mid-range dash that could pivot to whatever it needed to be. Maybe that makes this huge comeback starting this ProQuest season. But if you're a deck builder and you like the strategy of deck building and sideboarding, just go, oh wait, it's this way. Just go with Dash. And finally, this is one that some people are not gonna like. You're not gonna like this maybe, but I'm gonna put it on the list because I do think that this is going to become a top hero. And it's so funny because every time someone makes one of these lists, I feel like there's always someone out there that says it's going to be a top hero, but it's Rhinar. Look, Rhinar got some stuff from Dynasty, and not only did Rhinar get some stuff from Dynasty, but like every time Brute gets a little better and a little bit more consistent, it acts as sort of like this, and this is weird to say, like it acts as like a foil for control decks, because control decks want to defend efficiently. And it acts as sort of a weird foil for aggro decks, because aggro decks want to just like keep all their cards and like use equipment to block, or just try not like to race and then not take like I guess take an insane amount of damage, but like not really care about it. And Rhinar attacks you in both ways. If you're a control deck, you want to use your cards to block efficiently, use your equipment to block efficiently and stop like on hits and things like this. And Rhinar says, no, I'm going to take half of your hand and then I'm going to deal you X amount of damage. Do you want to use the other cards that are left to, try and block some of it and then play a 2-card hand on your turn? Or do you want to drop all your equipment on this thing that's just huge attack? And that's what Rhinar does for control decks. For aggro decks are more than content to have their whole hand taken away. But the problem is that if they don't do any blocking, then there's a chance that Rhinar just kills them faster, because nowadays Rhinar can play some insane amounts of damage on specific turns and still play a value game too, where they block with 2 cards and, send back like 8-9 damage a turn. And so the idea, and it's just so funny to me because I know there's people in the comments, leave a comment down below if this is you, but I know there's people in the comments that are gonna be like, Rhinar always gets put here and it always falls from grace halfway through the season. And you might be right. Look, you may be right that Rhinar is not as good as I believe that he will be, but it's just so hard to argue against someone, especially when Rhinar players are consistently Rhinar players and they always commit to being Brute, and so they get really good. And if you take a good Rhinar player and you just throw them into like ProQuest, I feel like they could just possibly eat up the field, right? I don't know. This is how I feel about Rhinar, and I do think he's a deck that you should know how to play against and fear to some degree because having your hand like ripped half away and then having to figure out how to block this huge attack is terrifying, and all of us should be terrified of the old Brute guy here. So those are my 6 decks and 6 heroes that you should watch out for in this upcoming ProQuest season. Let me know in a comment below what you think about all of these heroes and which one you're most excited to perhaps play or least excited to play against. And if you made it this far, I don't know, what do you want for Christmas? What's your go-to Christmas present? You have a go-to Christmas? Leave that in the comment below too. That'd be kind of fun. Hear what you want to get for Christmas. Everybody loves thinking about gifts and stuff, right? So I would love to hear that. And also, thank you so much for everyone that pressed this button. For some reason, when that number crossed over to 6, it hit different. It just did. It just hit different. I was like, ooh, 6. Look at that. Hey, so if you want to make the number go even higher, feel free to press a button to make a number go up by 4, if you could. I don't know how you make it go by 4 yourself. As always, thanks for watching.